So friends, the topic for today is essence of true education. And I know the title may seem a bit loaded. Why would I say true education when education is just education? It's just to highlight in the mind of the listener that perhaps what we know as education today may be a false impression of the true thing. So I put that word in there. And essence, the word in Sanskrit we can use in place of essence is Dharma. And Dharma has many meanings, but context matters, right? So Dharma in this context or essence means the property of a thing without which the thing is not what it's supposed to be. For example, sugar is sweet. Without sweetness, it's not sugar, correct? So what I want to capture here is that property of education that without which it's not education. And in fact, this is not an academic content talk. It should leave you with a feeling of what education is. And why it's necessary to talk about education, as we've been already discussing, is that, you know, thousands of years ago, we entered into the era of Kali Yuga. And at the very beginning, sage Vyasa was asked, or he wrote the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Puranas. The Bhagavad Puranas are stories which tell the tales of people and circumstances, but in it is captured in the kernel of it is education and knowledge on how to clear ignorance. And that knowledge was infused into stories because people were becoming less scholarly. During Satya Yuga, people were more scholarly. And why scholarliness? Because the human being has a need to know. We're an agnostic species. We are actually jnanis by nature. And we want to know. Even a child, when it's born, is curious. It's constantly asking questions. But what are the answers that people are finding today? What is it that we really need to know? We have a lot of knowledge about the terrestrial world, which is science. And science today is like examining a piece of an arc of a circle whose radius is infinite. Think about that, right? Just one segment. Or it's like taking a lamp into an infinitely dark room, and the lamp lights a little spot. And science says, oh, we've discovered something, and this is the answer. But the true jnani, the true intellectual, becomes aware of the infinite darkness around that spot. And he works himself to become the blazing sun to dispel all the darkness, you see. So I believe science is good, of course. I'm a scientist too. But I believe in today's science, it is purely focused on the terrestrial material world and doesn't help people fulfill the mission of the goal of human life, which is some higher realization. The fundamental principles of education have been lost, which is the reason I put this talk out there. And education has actually been in the hands of those that are actually uneducated, lacking education. And the fundamental principles ought to be examined and discreetly reintroduced without upsetting the current systems. So this is a quote of a quote. So William Osler was a great physician and philosopher, and he says that the medical man, perhaps more than any other man, needs this higher education. And what is that higher education? It's an education in virtue, and it must start from a young age. And that education enables a man to pursue ideal perfection. So two questions must come up. What is virtue and what is that ideal perfection? I do like words. And if you look at the word virtue, the origin of it is in Sanskrit from vira, very powerful word, which in its original form means manliness. Now, we had to say we need to inculcate manliness or virtue. In today's world, with all the gender sensitivities, the feminists will come and attack me, right? But see, manliness, when you go to the depth of words, and this is another problem with education today's words have lost their meaning, was not a reference to gender. There was an association, and other words come to mind like courage, merit, goodness, authority, power, to be generous, upright and gentle, energetic, happy and effective in life. Now, all those words are not joined by convention. As Ram Swarup says in his book, They are held together by a psychic force, an inner pull, something nuclear within us, an inner spiritual awareness, appropriateness, an intuitive perception and hidden wisdom working in the back of the word. So suddenly the word virtue takes on a whole depth of meaning, right? Whereas today, when we speak about such words, they have a very shallow, meaning. So we have to go back to the depth of it and see what the root of words is. They come from something inner. And then what is perfection is something I will deal with in a few slides from now. So before we go into what education is, there's something we got to understand about what it means to be human. And one way of considering that is trying to compare ourselves to other species. If you look at plants, for example, they exist, they have life, they just grow, they have a body. But beyond that, the capabilities are very limited. Of course, there's beautiful science to understand in plants, and they perform a great function on the planet. And without them, we have nothing. But plants have a body, not really capable of emotions, and let alone an intellect or buddhi to contemplate. So they just exist. If the plant's in a certain spot and there's water 2 kilometers away, even if it's drying up, it cannot walk over to that water and use it. It's limited. It's not very self-sufficient in that manner. So that's a plant. Then you get animals, and animals are step up. They have a body and they have a mind. We see affection in animals. We see desires in animals. We see impulses in animals. And they move. But they are limited by their individual program. There's a little more self-sufficiency, but there's a limitation. For example, some animals will move with migratory patterns to avoid winter, to get food in a different region or geography. But they are limited by that pattern and it cannot go beyond it. Bees function within a paradigm, great intelligence there perhaps, but it's prescriptive. It's like a computer program. They work within their parameters. And of course, there's a beauty to be appreciated. Some animals may have a rudimentary intellect, ability to think. And we see that in chimpanzees, maybe even in some dogs where they can discriminate between the master and a stranger. That discrimination slightly becomes evident, right? But when you get to human form, this is the apex of creation, the masterpiece, you see. It is the human being that has a body, it has a mind which is capable of feelings, emotions, impulses, and desires. But the human being has this noble gift of an intellect or buddhi. And there's two parts to that intellect. It can manage the mind to live in the terrestrial world and manage the terrestrial life, without which, of course, the terrestrial life becomes a nightmare, which is the argument of the philosopher that in today's times, everybody's living by the mind's impulses, likes and dislikes, and not using the intellect to govern life, which gives us the chaotic world we live in today. But the other part of the intellect is the subtle intellect. It is that part that can penetrate the realms of the terrestrial world and contemplate something transcendental. A human being in his full form is a contemplator. It is only in the human form that we can get to that level of asking the higher questions, the spiritual questions. See, spirituality simply means the contemplation of the transcendental while we live in the terrestrial. It is the ability to conceive of something subtler, vast, non-restricted, unlimited, boundaryless, where the terrestrial world is full of materiality, the material world. So knowledge of the material world keeps you bound to the material world, whereas knowledge or education that takes you to that goal of the human mission, which is self-realization, ultimately becomes true education, educare. So this just to help us conceive that there is more to a human, body, mind, intellect. But underlying all of that, there's that spiritual element, because even the body, the mind, and the intellect are material, right? The body is the gross structure, the mind and intellect is the subtle body, right? And all of them are manifest from a causal body, the vasanas, the fragrance, which we can't understand. You see, there's this infinite background of self, which we are told about in scripture, God, Allah, Bhagwan, whatever we want to call it, the pristine, spotless state. But through ignorance of that state, which we cannot understand that point of ignorance, original sin in the Bible, they call it perhaps, these vasanas are manifest. Every individual has different vasanas. Vasanas literally translated means fragrance. And it's along those railway tracks or lines that every human has a particular body, mind, and intellect, and inclinations and tendencies, which we are caught up in. You see, we receive the world through our senses, we react at the mind level, and we respond with our actions into the world, using our limbs and speech. And a human not using the intellect to govern the mind just lives through those three transactions. They become an automaton, impulsive living, again birth, again death. Punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, says Adi Shankaracharya. You know? So you keep going through that. But education ought to activate this intellect. You see, that's the goal, ultimately. So I'm putting up there for context, this slide. And this self is completely forgotten. It is the blank slate. You can't even call it blank because it's beyond all our ideas of what is and what isn't. And it's on this blank slate that we are experiencing this world of change and phenomenon, you see. And this is how education was done in the past. You see, everything we experience in life is changing. The body is changing, the mind is changing, the seasons change. Every object that we acquire changes. It once didn't exist, it may exist now, and it will cease to exist in the future. So an intellectual starts asking the question, if change is observable, and change is only observable against a fixed object, think about it. If you're moving in a plane in the sky, and there's no object outside, if it's a plain blue sky, it feels like you're not moving. There's no change observable. But if you put a fixed cloud there, right, suddenly the change is observable. So every day, you and I are experiencing change, and nobody is cognizing or trying to reflect on what is the changeless substratum on which the change is occurring. That's the goal. That's the eternal self. So at his highest level, the human being has a physical personality and emotional personality. We have that intellectual personality, but the subtle buddhi or subtle intellect is the contemplator that contemplates the infinite. So that's the background. Now, if we get into education, we have to be prepared to take the red pill, which is the inconvenient truths, because today our species has gone into herd mentality. We just accept that blue pill approach, where everything is just convention. And, we need to be able to face uncomfortable truths if we're going to understand things at a deeper level. So the word education comes from various Latin roots, and it means actually at its root to draw out, educare. It means to nourish, to bring out of you, to lead forth. It does not imply putting in things, which is what the education systems do today. Today, all universities and schools take theoretical knowledge and pound it into students so that they have to swat it off. It's all memory. It's not real education. Real education, right, is drawing out something from within, movement from in to out. Duko means developing or progressing, and you progress. So what is that progress? Ultimately, from the terrestrial to the transcendental. Rabindranath Tagore said, the world is full of sound scholars, but not sound men. There's a point to be made here. You see, if you look at our field and every other field, engineering, business, etc., there are a lot of sound scholars. Today, we pride academics, PhDs, masters, titles, but they have no substance. To have the courage to say it. Every meeting we go to, everybody is ego stroking the degrees we've attained. He's got a PhD. I mean, sometimes when you attend talks at medical meetings, the introduction of the speaker takes 20 minutes and the actual talk is only 10 minutes, right? We see this. It's an interesting state. I'm not against PhDs and masters and having degrees. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying we've put an overemphasis and a result orientation to the achievement of these things, whereas the true educator is a sound man. So you see, you get this paradoxical behavior when knowledge has not metamorphosed into wisdom, where you get a lot of academic knowledge. You want to talk a lot, you want to say a lot, and it comes out almost verbose and heavy to take. And even amongst the most academic, intelligent people, not intellectual, intelligent, there's a difference between intelligence and intellect. Intellect is the ability to think and discriminate. There's a wisdom that comes with it. Whereas intelligence is external sources, book knowledge. You can get a PhD professor who is unable to govern his emotions. He still takes too much of alcohol. He gets angry at people, you see? So the PhD and the master's is not going to help you be intellectual, to conceive of a higher, more mature state of a human, you see? That's the difference. And the problem is today, people gravitate to those sound scholars because they come in suits, they come with titles, they come with awards and trophies. And then we select them, consulting agencies, etc., to try and solve the world's problems. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, intellect is not known to the man who has none. And this is the difficulty. Like to recognize a true intellectual, a true jnani, the people that are able to solve the problems, who actually do not interfere with the world. They have no ego, so they will not come and force themselves onto people. You need to recognize that, you see. Intellect reflects over the knowledge gained, the information gained from external sources. So without an intellect, even intelligence is useless because we need intellect to use intelligence. See the difference there, right? And today in educational institutions, there's no provision made for students and scholars to reflect on knowledge. It is just content heavy and exam related result orientation, you know. So I think Rabindranath Tagore recognized this a very long time ago. If you're wearing an ochre robe or a nice suit, or you have many PhDs, right? That is not necessarily a sound man. That's the point. It is not against it, is we can get taken by the outer garb thinking these are people with intellectual prowess. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. This is a critical thing in knowledge. You see, in the age of over-information, people can be misguided by misinformation. There's a group of people called aggressive bad in the Vedic sciences. It's the equivalent of a Ravana, where they're highly intellectual, but they're not full intellect because they've not imbibed the fundamental values of life, of objectivity, service orientation, love, identification, etc. They have a selfish tendency with a high intellect. And they will use knowledge to manipulate the masses who are passive and don't have an intellect, you see. And that's why we have to, amongst the passive, reinculcate the development of intellect or true logic. You'll see it, social media. What are mothers doing today? Fathers making strange videos because everybody is doing it, dancing in strange ways, eating weird things, silly videos. You know, the maturity of the humans being lost, and we got this infantile approach because mind just gets taken by herd mentality when your individual intellect is not available. This is not a free species. We think we got freedom. See, everybody wants happiness in life, but happiness is dependent on freedom. And freedom is dependent on mastery of the mind through development of the intellect. It's a very important point. So we get into the education system as it is. And what education has become, it's what we call a servile education system. Servile from the word slave or servant. We've taken education and made a servant of it. And it's the servant of a material life today. You go to university not to just study for studying's sake, for serving humanity and that sort of thing. What we go to university for is to earn money, to get something to earn money. And I showed you that slide. The lowest part of the human is the material part, the body. So money only helps maintain the body. There's nothing wrong with earning money. That's not what we're saying. But the primary utility of education has become material, and it's used for vocational, mercenary, or pecuniary purposes, which is just purely earning. People in the more developing parts of the world will spend so many thousands of dollars sending their children to Western universities. Not against them. There's great science, great engineering, mathematics, etc. But what they learn there is competition and how to get ahead, ego fertilization, to get ahead in the world, to make more money. That is purely the business of universities today. And it changed many, many moons ago. There was, this is from my guru's books, he pointed out a chap called Cardinal Henry Newman, who was a British theologian and educator. And he writes a book called The Idea of a University, where he predicts the fall of the university system, where people came to study for studying's sake, where knowledge was about liberal education to develop your human capacities. And of course, in doing that through your art, like Leonardo da Vinci and all the great scholars in the past, you would be able to serve your community and your society. You become a true kavi, a physician, because you're interested in the art of healing, and you would have a job then. And of course, the earning becomes secondary. Actually, earning money is a side effect of pursuing higher ideals in life and serving humanity. It should not be the primary goal. You see? So this is where people get it wrong when we talk about Vedic philosophy and Vedanta. They think you got to become a recluse and just study and live on alms. No, you can be a master in the marketplace. When a lamp gives light, when a candle burns itself to give light, oxygen comes to supply it. When we pursue knowledge for knowledge's sake and use it to serve, you will get what you need to support you materially. It comes automatically, you see. So Cardinal Newman predicted this in his book, The Fall of the Idea of a University. And actually, there's a British politician, I think he's still around, Charles Clarke, who started saying that every university, the content must contribute to economic productivity. So, the colonizers of the world then put this utility tag to education, whereas in Bharat and the Eastern countries, there was never a utility tag to education. Bharat, Bra, Sanskrit means place of knowledge. You see, so we had recognized that the human machine needs knowledge, but for a higher purpose. And then later, this utility tag gets added to it, and every university now is linked to the political system. How are we going to produce products of humans that will increase the economy? This is the only use for education in the world. And it's used for increasing the material living of standard of living, but it pushes you to a selfish, self-centered life. This is the problem of ego in the West. Well, it's percolating all over the world right now. So you see woke culture being formed, lots of more diversity, people not able to entertain opinions and discussions. Material life, body life is segregated life. Education that only fertilizes the material life, right, leads to selfish, self-centered life. You become concentrated like camphor. But real knowledge sublimates camphor. It lightens it, makes you more spiritual, makes you identify with other people. So this type of education, which comes in this post-colonial culture, was the death knell of learning and education, and it eliminated the wisdom and culture of the human race. And the effect of it ultimately is it kills the joy of learning, leads to more anxiety and stress. Across the world, universities, students have burnout. I deal with a lot of our medical students on this subject. There's a slavery then to technology. I'm not particularly impressed by AI. It's entertaining at the most. Of course, it will evolve. I'm not against it either. But the point of needing all of these things, right? Slavery to technology is the lack of our intellectual ability within. What was the capability of a Swami Vivekananda, a Swami Ramatirtha? Vivekananda would hold a book, page through it, and within seconds would imbibe all of it. He was able to think. That capability we don't see in this Kali Yuga anymore. You see? So we got to light these sparks of intellectual development. And with this kind of education, people live a herd instinct, rat race. Everybody follows fashion. TikTok, everybody's on TikTok. Facebook, everybody's on Facebook. If you're smart, you go against the herd. See, that's the intellect. Eagles fly on their own. Chickens and pigeons barely get off the ground and end up causing a mess. When you don't have knowledge, you don't know what you are worth. And in that ignorance, we create desires, and desires go towards the world. And what do? We just consume, acquire, and enjoy. I'm not saying those things are wrong. I'm just pointing out they're the end product of not having correct education. The other thing is not recognized by education systems is the concept of swadharma and paradharma. Swadharma is that, remember we said vasanas are individual to a person, right? And from those vasanas are born your tendencies, one's own nature. So a child can be born with tendencies towards nature, mathematics, accounting, engineering, you see. And if they work within the field of that nature or educated or learn in that field, then it's like a tailwind to a plane. It supports it, they get there effectively, they use less fuel, there's less chance of them burning out, there's a progressive path, you see. But what education systems do today is take every child, every student, and put them into one block, and they give them modules you must just study that are perhaps alien to their nature. In fact, perhaps this is why we also may overdiagnose ADHD, attention deficit. A child who's just mathematically inclined is not going to study biology as well. You see, it's against his nature, and it's against his natural tendencies. And then we have the social influence. A child is born into a business family with tendencies towards art, but his parents will say, you must run the business. He'll never do well. He'll burn out and become a vegetable or a rebel, you know. So initially, you can push through paradharma against your nature with effort, but later you develop a monotony. And you'll see these people as adults, scholars becoming adults, they'll end up doing things as a hobby, which is in their field of interest, which is actually what they ought to be doing. And to be a photographer, should do photography, you see. If you want to be a carpenter, do carpentry. So this is what happens. And this is what even many scholars have said. Imam al-Ghazali of the Islamic faith said, what is sought for its own intrinsic value is nobler and more excellent than that which is sought as a means to an end, you know. And every religion, Christianity as well, Jesus Christ, was all about knowledge, advocating knowledge. He said to the Pharisees and the scribes, you have locked this knowledge up and held it from the population, and you've not even used it yourself. Christ was trying to convey this knowledge. He was a teacher, right? And he knew the populace wasn't accessing knowledge. That's why they weren't free, right? The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, advocated education and knowledge as an obligatory duty of every Muslim, you see. And here, the Hujjatul of Islam, the proof of Islam, Imam al-Ghazali, he was a great teacher and philosopher. In fact, his book called The Book of Knowledge is one I would recommend one should read. My guru himself says it's demeaning and vulgar to look at education as a wealth creation process. And he says living is an art, a skill, a technique, and we have to learn and practice it, just as we would a musical instrument. So how do we do that? We need a liberal education. Servile education doesn't work for a human being. And this is education that's taken for education's sake. It is no stigma of trading with it. It has its own end. And it is impregnated by reason, which is intrinsic. You have to think all the time. Why am I doing this? You question everything, and you do not take things at face value. It cultivates the intellect. And this type of education develops not just your intellect, but helps you distinguish virtue from vice. Remember, we said that education which through virtue leads to perfection. Virtue is vira, that manliness, courage. Now, what is virtue? Today we think virtue is a list of do's and don'ts, good and bad things. If you're nice to a person, you're a virtuous person. No, real virtue depends on situation. You take the example of Krishna on the battlefield. Krishna is the highest intellect. I mean, he is in that self-realized state. He's liberal, he's free. But look at Krishna's behavior throughout the Mahabharata. People get confused. Huh? On the battlefield, he takes off the chariot wheel to kill Bhishma at a point where the rules of war say he should not do that. You see, it appears to be a wrong act. But that moment Krishna doing is acting in virtue. So to people who don't have an intellect, who depend on rules and laws, the person who does have an intellect may seem crazy. But there's a purpose to why Krishna does that against the rules of war at that moment, because he wants to stir Arjuna into action, and he can see the bigger picture at play. Even in the court, when they're having some meeting in the Mahabharata, there's a king called Shishupala in the court, and he keeps insulting Bhima, someone, And according to the rules of engagement, in such a court meeting, there should be no violence. But after repeated warnings, Krishna gets upset with Shishupala and sends his spinning disc and takes off his head, to which the other attendees of this meeting say, hey, this is the wrong thing. But Krishna is acting out of virtue. What is that intellect? He's protecting the good all the time. And he is not victimized nor victimized by others. Every human is capable of this free state. You become automatically benevolent, and you become a beacon of knowledge for others to follow. So that liberal education instills aggressive goodness in us. It's a light that dispels all darkness, ultimately. The pictures here are important. I put a contrasting picture here to help us understand what liberal education is. Because people misunderstand liberal education as having no value, or you're just going to study art and that sort of thing. In the liberal education system, there are mechanical or utility arts as well. And art is a carefully reasoned out knowledge of how to produce something. It involves theoretical knowledge of the process and experiential knowledge of how to produce, right? So if you look at the material or mechanical arts, are those that are defined as activities which produce some use. And we need that. Producing furniture, right? Carpentry, electricians, all of these things are necessary. But the way they did it was not just to earn money. It's actually to serve society that it can function very well. You see, things for sitting, sleeping. And if you look at the mechanical arts of the past, the products of India, Japan, China, if they made a chair in the past, it will last you 100 years. There's a beauty to that chair, that piece of furniture, you see, which brings you to the second part, the fine arts, right? The second category of fine arts are those that rather than producing and don't have much of a use, they produce things of beauty that are pleasant to look at. Look at our old temples, architecture. Would you rather sit in an office block building, or would you go and visit a Gothic cathedral in Europe, or one of the ancient temples of India, or the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia? You see, they produce music, symphonies, etc., that every encounter of the human becomes beautiful. They are useful, not useful in a strict sense, but appeal to our intellectual nature as objects of contemplation and joy. When you see these objects of fine art, it incites that subtle intellect. You see, when you hear a beautiful piece of Carnatic music, you start thinking of the divine, of Sanskrit chants. When you walk down the road and you see a beautiful temple, your mind goes to the highest. In the West, wherever you walk, you'll see incitement of the senses, junk food, neon lights, drink alcohol, drink soft drinks, you see, eating. So that was liberal arts regarding the fine arts. These are the arts that make life worth living. And if all we had were the servile arts, just the mechanical things, our lives would be deprived of beauty and joy. And this is, I think, an essential thing that's lacking today in the design of our society. Then there's the final part, the third part, the liberal knowledge, right? If servile arts aim at the useful, fine arts aim at the pleasant, what is liberal art, liberal education, which is the essence of Vedanta ultimately? These arts do not produce objects outside the artisan, but produce persons. We produce humans. Human beings are creatures who have the unique ability to think and reason. I've highlighted already. Liberal arts or liberal educations enable us to know. They are not meant to make us good citizens or help us get a job or help us trade, right? Their primary purpose is to make us more fully human, more attentive to God and the things of God. This is liberal education. They are called liberal because they liberate a person to direct his own mind and self, thus freeing us to know ourselves and from unthinkingly following just opinion. A person who cannot know and think for themselves is at the mercy of those who can. You see? So this liberal education, if you get it right, will give you a very peaceful life in the world. You're an objective thinker. You can solve any problem. You'll be a great businessman. You can be great at your art, but you're serving community as well. And you become inwardly self-sufficient, unable to get dejected, depressed. You'll know what to eat in the right environment. You'll know how much exercise to get. Right? There's so many prescriptions on diet and exercise today. Education, there is, but who's getting it right? So the final part of this talk then takes you to the next level. Liberal education will improve terrestrial life, but its ultimate game, right, is this, to take us to that transcendental. You see, knowledge and education, or education must be sought. It has to be taken through self-effort. Today, we're serving up platters of knowledge for everybody in universities. We're spoon feeding them. We need to go deeper and encourage people to seek knowledge. In the past, students would traverse the jungles of the Himalayas and fight tigers and difficult climates to find teachers. The teachers would sit there. They don't come and deliver down from the Himalayas. You have to go and get it. And the forms of teaching, methodologies involved these four methods. Pratyaksha is direct perception. Now, direct perception can only be used for the terrestrial world. You cannot directly perceive God or the infinite. So the limitation of direct perception, which is science, is for the world, you see. In the ancient systems, we used inference and comparison to gain an idea of what is God, which is beyond ideas, you see. So where there's smoke, there has to be fire. There's an inference. Where there's a changing world, there has to be an unchanging substratum below it. It makes you think, you see. So comparison and inference were used in education systems through stories and logical thinking. Tradition depends on a teacher and spread of knowledge through oral traditions and certain rituals and culture around that person, you see. So you go to gurus and there's a tradition of teaching, and you have to accept through your own intellect and assessment that this teacher knows what he's talking about. You don't just accept blind value with blind faith. And all knowledge goes from the known to the unknown. We cannot create superstition. For example, we know the laws of science say there's a law of continuity and the law of conservation of energy, right? So then how do we talk about death and the afterlife? We can't say it's suddenly the end. The ancient Indian sages and mystics have thought about this. Well, the body goes back to soil, gets recycled, that material matter gets recycled into plants and animals and soil, etc. It continues like that, isn't it? So we cannot then say that at death, the energy of the subtle body, which is the mind and intellect, suddenly disappears. So you have to conceive that. So we don't know what is after that, but from the known, we can extrapolate. So knowledge goes from the known to the unknown. But ultimately, real education, real knowledge is about the process of negation. And very few understand this. You see, how can you tell people to negate what is known? But this is the process of not that. See, your mind creates the idea, for example, that when I earn 10 crores, I'll be happy. The intellect says, is that so? So you examine people who have achieved that degree of wealth and ask, are they happy? Analyze the angles of things. Look at it, as Rituparna and Dr. Ranjan said, from different angles, you see? And you'll find that that is not true. That 10 crores does not equal happiness. In fact, where wealth accumulates, men decay. Not that. Not that. So all the assumptions that we have through real education slowly get negated. And what will reveal itself ultimately is that underlying true self. I'm pure knowledge amongst the knowers. You see, it's kind of like this as well, to make an example of it. If you look at this picture here, if I ask anyone, what do you see? Dr. Ranjan, what do you see?
It's some small stones, or it can be bubble. Light is
Bubbles,
coming.
yeah.
Yeah.
Light, yeah.
Light
It's
in
a
a
beam of light with dust in it, right?
Oh,
Right. There's a
yes.
window there. Right. Now, what you see is light plus dust, correct?
Yeah.
Right. If you remove all the dust, you will not see the light.
True.
Right.
True.
So similarly, this process of negation, if the world is the dust, right? If we constantly negating the world, not maliciously, what remains is the light. So what is light? Light is what you see minus the dust, right? What is the infinite? What is self? What is God, right? It's what you see minus the world. Consciousness without any object, objectless consciousness. You see? So see, this kind of discussion in education doesn't happen anymore, where you activate, you stimulate that intellectual thinking, right? So this is the type of critical thinking and logic theory that needs to be infused into our education system. What Adi Shankaracharya called Nitya Anitya Viveka Vicharam. Viveka means discrimination, correct perspective, merit, weighing the advantages and disadvantages of things. Nitya means eternal, real. What's the definition of reality? That which used to exist, does exist, continues to exist. Now apply that definition to anything we know. Nothing meets that definition. So it's unreal. But the thing in front of you can't be unreal because you're using it. I'm using this iPad and computer right now. So if a thing is not real and it's not unreal, then what is it? It's an illusion. Call it Maya, you see. So how do you get rid of an illusion? You investigate it. You walk towards the oasis in the desert where you think there's a mirage. And as you investigate it, it disappears. When the oasis disappears, what's left is the desert, isn't it? So the eternal manifests itself. Nitya Anitya Viveka Vicharam. To discriminate between the ephemeral. Anitya means not real, ephemeral, changing, non-permanent. You see? And Nitya is that which is real. So we constantly and steadily, later he says, Kuru Vadadanam Maha Davadanam. Slowly, steadily, you go through life, live a life of service, examine life and its realities, take in knowledge, but discriminate. Then you start seeing the ephemeral nature of the world, and the self underlying should, in time, maybe many janmas later, manifest. Vairagya is that renunciation that happens then, because as you establish yourself in that which is eternal, you're not bothered by the stuff of the world. Actually, you live a better life, isn't it? So this type of education, ultimately liberal, has a relative benefit and an absolute benefit. For those few that are seeking, you drop the noise and you get to that vairagya, become an absolute renunciate. But today in the world, with all the knowledge, all the forced education, intelligence, there's too many thoughts jamming our minds, traffic jams, you know. And through action and service, you offload unselfish desires. The desires settle, the mind is not agitated. And when the mind's not agitated, intellect is clear and knowledge is present. So even unselfish action is education in a way. It's karma yoga, ultimately, right? So I hope I've made the point on this one. I think this is the crux of optimal learning. Practically, time of study and best time to think about these things, 4 to 6 a.m., the time of God in the morning, and sit with it. People tend to, even after Sattvic time and study, get onto their phones, start watching YouTube videos. You don't allow the knowledge to percolate. You don't allow the intellect to concretize. We should stay with it as long as we can in the morning. What we should be studying is scriptural material. And I'm not a fanatic, but it is the way it is designed. The scriptural knowledge of the East, the Vedas, are the ultimate. You can't go beyond the Upanishads in terms of the highest thought. Of course, they're tributaries of knowledge, depending on your level. You should indulge it. The book Vedanta Treatise, written by Swami A. Partha Sarate, has put all the knowledge into contemporary wisdom in a logical, scientific way. And I think for a modern scientific world, that's a good one to have in parallel to other studies, at least, if not the one to study, at least until you've completed it. Takes you from the known to the unknown. So you need scriptural knowledge, not novels, not Harry Potter, and all that other stuff, right? You got to contemplate the truths. You got to apply it in daily life with a consistent effort, patience, and perseverance. Daily, bit by bit, scratch away. The ultimate aim, friends, now, 2 slides or so to go. This is a concept I'm for the first time introducing in a public talk. You see, we got a lot of isms and political strife and issues in the world. And you can see capitalism doesn't seem to be working. Socialism has an endpoint where it still ends up being about the material part of life. Whereas true Vedantic socialism reconciles the claims of the individual and the group. When this higher knowledge is available and percolated through society, everybody lives for a higher purpose, to each according to his need, from each according to his capacity. It inspires a natural and organic efficiency, perfection, and cooperation in society, rather than forced cooperation through institutes and groups and NGOs that do social work. I'm not saying they're wrong, they're in need of the time. But in the long term, you can develop social consciousness through correct education. And Vedanta, Veda means knowledge, Anta means end of. Vedanta doesn't belong to anyone. You can call it whatever you want. It is the laws of life in the universe. It's the central vision to control our whole economy of practical life. And unlike modern systems which lead to self-exclusion, which the end product of which is exploitation, corruption, and cruelty, it leads to self-enlargement, realization of our oneness with God, ego transcendence, self-universalization, and you get the healthiest principles to guide life in society. You know, today there's so much wrong stuff that gets propagated as healthy for you. It's ego-driven stuff. And when you have the spiritual basis for society, it actually becomes superior to all these current political ideals. See, yes, there is talk about equality, liberty, and fraternity, but there's a more mature way of looking at it. It's not at a superficial level. Equality is at the level of the infinite self. The more that identify with the self, the more we see the unifying within us rather than the diversifying. And it is not just an Eastern culture. It started in the East thousands of years ago. The root of all knowledge is India, the northern slopes of the Himalayas. But even in Western culture, this is from the Renaissance. This particular painting is called the School of Athens, and it has on the various tiers of the steps the great scientists, painters, thinkers, Euclid with geometry, Copernicus, Raphael himself is in the painting. There's Hypatia, the female scientist who got burnt by the Orthodox Christianity at the stake for having more rational ideas and logic. But at the center of this painting is our dear Plato in red and sort of purple, with his finger pointed up and his feet almost coming off the ground, saying to Aristotle on his left with blue and brown, representing water and earth, the terrestrial life, you see? So Aristotle was more involved with, what do you call it? worldly life, morals, philosophies, which are important to guide your terrestrial life. And he's carrying his book, what do you call it? Nicomachean Ethics. That was his great book. But Plato's book is called Timaeus, and it begins with the distinction between the physical world and the eternal world. So he's saying there's this transcendental purpose. He's raising himself off the ground. While we live this terrestrial life, we need to contemplate. And Plato believed in the eternal one, which never changes. And it is only apprehended by reason, which takes you to the border and ultimately becomes the goal of life and a realization and an experience rather than knowing. The ultimate objectives of education, friends, is to develop that physical, emotional, intellectual self-sufficiency. But ultimate self-sufficiency is dwelling in the self. That brings happiness. Happiness is not in objects. There's no light in the moon and people rush towards that light. There's no happiness in objects. The light on the moon is reflected from the sun. The happiness we think are in objects and beings of the world is actually the light of the infinite self reflecting off things. With happiness and knowledge, you become knowledge, that bright light that dispels. Love is identification with others and all species, even animals. You see the oneness in all. And ultimately, there's power. Real power comes through service, sacrifice, right? Real power is jnani sitting there, giving this knowledge very humbly. When you meet a self-realized guru, every move of theirs is love. When you ask a self-realized guru, what do you see? Recently, my guru was asked that question by a visitor, and he said, all I see is love. In the animals, I see is love. In the terrorist, I see love. In the savior of humanity, I see love, you see. And what is that power? I cannot understand it, but the goal of true education is this: self-sufficiency, happiness, knowledge, love, and power. And I'll end off with a quote from the Kenopanishad. Austerity, restraint, and action are its foundation, capital I, infinite. Knowledges are its limbs. Truth is its abode. The entire talk that took so many slides and so many words is summed up in 2 lines of the Upanishads here, but it requires a deep contemplation and reflection. This is my talk for today. I hope it's left you with a feeling of the essence of education. It's a mustard seed, if reflected on, tiny little mustard seed, that will grow into a huge tree or branch. And a tree or a branch serves, provides shelter, gives fruit. This is the prerogative and the calling of every human being. Thank you for your time.